We're going to now start our discussion about both the clinician educator and the practice tracks. And we're going to start with a presentation from Dr. Penny Asbell, who's a professor of ophthalmology and is also vice chair of the clinical section of the A&P committee. So with that, please.
Thank you. Okay, so this is very informal. Feel free to ask questions, and no question is off bounds, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process and then hope that some of my colleagues who from the A&P committee would chime in terms of their experience and their recommendations. So the question is, why bother? And to some extent, some of our older clinicians may have that sort of feeling, like I'm doing what I want to do, I like what I'm doing, why bother with appointment and promotion, what does it mean to me? I think particularly for the younger people who are starting out, it is an opportunity to plan your career. I mean, there are many other things you plan in life too, getting married, whatever, children. This is another opportunity to see what you want and how to get there. And the nice thing about appointment and promotion is you have to apply, a committee has to review, and it's really nice to get that positive feedback that your colleagues within your institution feel that you are making significant contributions. So that's nice. And lastly, if not most important, it goes along with compensation. It's a great way to have a conversation with your division head, your chair, about where you are financially. And when you're promoted, almost everybody gets a financial compensation increases as well. So worth thinking about and worth getting involved. What are the key things that you need to think about? And I know you may have had some time in the earlier session, and you may have discussed some of these things. So I'll just point out some of these. And I don't have too many slides, so really we're going to have more questions as we go along. You heard this earlier this afternoon that there are different tracks. There's the academic, now called the Investigator track. There's a clinical educator track, there's a practice track, there's a research track, and there's a voluntary track. So there's a lot of tracks, which means there's a place for you. So you don't have to think I can only do this and I'm not doing it, so there's no place for me, there's some place for you. The second point is key. Who recommends a promotion? We talk about it in medical care today, the one who has a key to get you an appointment. Who controls access? All of the control here is through the chairman of your department. So if you're in a department, and I say this quite pointedly, if you're in a department and you and your chair don't see eye to eye, he or she thinks you should be doing more clinical work or should be doing more research or whatever, and that's not what you want to do, you need to seriously think whether that's the right place to be, because they hold all the reins in terms of promoting you. You're going to help them with information and things like that. But if you have a different point of view about what you ought to be doing from that person, you're going to have trouble getting promoted, okay, because they have to submit the promotion. Now, in many departments, and not all, tell me, how about in surgery? Do you have a committee that reviews?
Yes, we have a group of people who review.
So before the chair gets it, the committee has reviewed it?
Yes.
Okay. I know you do that, don't you, in your in emergency medicine?
We do.
We do. You have a committee. Do you
I'm the
get,
committee.
what?
I'm the committee.
You're the committee. Okay. Committee of one. Okay. So we have a committee on paper, but we also have a committee of one. It's called the chairman. So I think that you need to find out how your system works. And you just heard informally here that it's different in different departments. I think medicine has a more formal review committee, and I don't think it gets to the chairperson before until the committee has reviewed the process. So then you have to know who's on the committee and things like that, so you understand the process. So one of the key things is to understand the process within your division, your department, which is not universally the same throughout the medical center. Then you want to know, is your appointment renewable? Because some of the tracks aren't. They're sort of up and out. And if you pick one of those, that's great, but you better know that that's what you're picking, okay? And that's what you'd like to be on. So think about that in terms of picking a track. And is tenure possible? Tenure is nice because we like to say we have tenure, right? Everybody here like to say they have tenure? You know what it means? Not a lot, okay? It just feels good. It's very different than, actually I was just recently a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. Anybody been to UC Berkeley? It's a beautiful campus. Isn't it gorgeous? Okay, I was in a part that I hadn't been to up on the hill, and it was really, really nice. They get 100% of their salary guaranteed if they have tenure. Not bad. Okay, that's not true at Mount Sinai, okay? There is a certain amount guaranteed for rank, but it's modest. And in the Upper East Side, at least, it wouldn't even pay for parking your car. So it's nice to get a little something, but it's not a financial reward, okay? And kind of honestly, if you're in that boat, you're probably not getting along with a lot of people, and it's probably not the funnest day of your week interacting. So you don't want to be in that position. So the tenure is really the honor of the tenure, at least in our institution. And that's one of the things to think about in terms of even position and career. These things that we call appointment and promotion, we talk about as though they were written in stone, and in fact they are for our institution. You know, they're there, you know, they don't change too often. In other institutions, they're handled very differently. So what is done here may or may not be done in other places. So don't assume that it's the same in other places. Where can you find more information? There is a faculty handbook, which is all online, and then there's opportunities like this, and I have to thank the group who organized this for putting it together. And then there are other networking events and other smaller events. So talk to people. You can't find this out without interacting with other people. And you learn a lot. So investigator track. This is the traditional, what we used to call academic track. And these are the people who are primarily doing research of some sort or another. It could be laboratory-based, but it doesn't have to be. It could be community medicine. It could be genetics. It could be a whole lot of things. One of the interesting things that's changed, and I said it's written in stone, but it has changed a little bit in the last few years. This used to be a traditional PhD. He or she had a laboratory. They had grants. They got new grants, et cetera. They published a lot. They tried to get the lead story in science, et cetera. But now we actually have a lot of people in this institution who come from industry, believe it or not, and get in this track. And they're doing things on genetics, big data, which is, the hot word among research these days. And they actually do not have an academic background, but they're investigating how do we define a genetic disease from a lot of data. They've never seen a patient. They don't plan to see a patient. And some of them, without giving specific names, walk around in shorts, even in the wintertime, and they don't know from white coats or anything like that, okay? So they have a very different approach to their life and to their research. So the investigator track now includes some of those people as well. But if you want to stay in that track at Mount Sinai, you do need to show scholarship, publications, education to residents, postdocs, other people, NIH funding, and other federal funding. Now, there is a research track, and we didn't expect it to be so popular when it was first developed. It was actually to make symmetry among the tracks. But we found that there's some people in research, especially those with PhDs, who end up being sort of experts in a technique. Could be electron microscopy and running a service of being, that's the go-to person. And they're on 5 different grants because they provide that expertise. They're the reading center for something, the pathology center for a big multi-center grant where they're doing pathology readings or biopsies, et cetera. And so they're not initiating the project typically. They're not like the lead on it, but they're an integral part, and it couldn't get funded, and it couldn't be published, and couldn't be done if they didn't participate. So the research track is for that person who's a researcher, but may not be the PI of the research that they're doing. But they too can move up, and they can even become professor as well. The Clinician Educator track is one of our more complex in the sense that it includes lots of different kinds of people. Obviously, the typical person is a clinician, an MD, some PhD psychologists, I might add, as well. And they're involved in clinical practice. If they want to be a professor, they're typically defined as a master clinician. They're involved in education of both residents and medical students. They publish. They teach. They have, by the time they become a professor, they should have not only a regional recognition, but a national and even international recognition. And many of them, if not all of them, end up doing service, being on committees and, other involvement with administrative tasks, both within the department and within the institution. But not others are more on the educator side. And they may be a PhD, such as somebody who teaches anatomy to medical students, who is very involved in teaching of medical students. He or she does not necessarily see patients or involved in clinical care, but is involved in all the other key points here in education, in scholarship, and in teaching, and in recognition, okay? Now, the newest track is a clinical practice track, which if I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy, if you become a professor in that, you're still a professor, right? They used to call it clinical professor, now it's all professor, correct?
No.
Is it, on the practice track, it's still,
The modifier used to be professor of practice of,
now it's,
now it's just professor.
yes, so they don't, just like any other professor, right? So it used to be sort of identified if you were on that track. Now, if you get to be a professor, you're still a professor, and only you and your CV knows which track you're on, to be honest. These are people who, you originally was defined, you know, Mount Sinai has acquired lots of practices, right? Both in the Manhattan area and the greater New York area. And those people, strangely enough, practiced medicine, okay? So they did 90, if not almost 100% of their time and effort was practicing. We needed some place for them, if you will, in the system. And the clinical practice track, and we just call it practice track for short, are people who are primarily doing 90% or thereabouts of clinical care. If they're a master clinician, we have metrics, RVUs, how many RVUs they do per year. Do they get a referral source beyond their local community? Are they, you know, the person to go to for lung disease? Are they the person to go to for whatever? And do they attract a sort of wider audience as they move up to become professor? They may do a little scholarship, typically as a co-author with a whole bunch of other people, maybe on a retrospective study or a clinical trial study. They may do some leadership roles in administration and healthcare, and they may do some teaching, and that medical students may rotate through their practice, you know, learning clinical care as part of their medical school education. So the practice track. So here's some of the differences between these tracks. First of all, I think the big difference is in the clinical practice track, which is the one where you're 90% a clinician or a very heavy-duty administrator, you know, kind of thing, you don't get tenure. Now, I told you tenure doesn't mean a lot, but it means a little bit, so you don't get tenure in that one. And then as you can see on the, looking on the line, sort of, you know, the top one of each one, the term length, it's slightly different in the different tracks. But both of them you could potentially, particularly on the associate level, you could end up staying there for as long as you like. Not everybody desires or wants to move up to professor, kind of thing. But you do have the opportunity to do that. And on the clinical educator track, you do have the opportunity to get tenure. This is different, and it's not on this slide, but it's different than the academic investigator track, which is an up and out. You have a couple of years at each assistant, associate title, but you got to move up to professor at some point. So you got to continue to be developing your track. Now, an instructor has no track assignment. When somebody enters less in surgery, do they start as an instructor or do they start as an assistant if they did a fellowship, let's say?
They usually start as an assistant professor.
Yeah, I would say that's true in ophthalmology. How does it turn out in emergency medicine?
Fellowship, you can start as a assistant professor out of residency instructor until you pass your boards.
Okay, so, and in medicine, Kathy, what do they usually start in medicine if they don't have a fellowship?
I believe they use the instructor.
Yeah, I think that sort of is the, often the defining distinction. Instructor, one is the licensing and finishing all that sort of stuff,
Right.
but the other is the fellowship, okay? I think fellowship trained individuals usually start as assistants, but that could vary from department to department, okay? So anyway, but it's up to the chair here. It's 1 year term, it is renewable, you can do it for 3 years, there's no tenure for instructors, okay? One of the other things, and actually, Andy, I may let you, because you've been fabulous on this, is how to present yourself. First, there is a format that Mount Sinai requires on their CV when it's submitted to the Appointment and Promotion Committee. I suggest you follow that format. Now, you may, for your own individual use, decide to modify it So you can have one CV over here that's your Mount Sinai CV, follow their rules, because that's how they're going to look at it, they're used to looking at it. You may decide you want to do a totally different kind of presentation in your own style, whatever, for other uses, where you're going to grab some of the information or maybe all of it. Some people like to do CVs by showing their success stories rather than listing publications, blah, 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 blah. They talk about, I reorganized pulmonary care to collaborate with our new center in Denver, and the things I did to make that happen, which would be less easy to show in the standard CV that we have. The key thing is to capture it, okay? So honestly, at the end of this meeting, I'm going to tell somebody who helps me with my CV to put down that I gave a lecture today. So I put everything down. Don't say like, well, this was not, we did here at Sinai, so it doesn't really count. It's not, it's not like I was invited to another city or state or something. Put everything down. If you decide you don't like something later on, you can always take it out and not include it if you're using it for some particular use. But put everything down because it's so easy to forget. Very easy to forget. Always put things down as you do them, right after you do them. It's the first thing I do after a meeting is update my CV. It's the very first thing. It is really easy to get busy, you get back, you're behind in your work, right? You go to a meeting and your national meeting on whatever your topic is, and you have a lot to do for that, then you get back and things are sort of messy because you've left a lot of stuff not done, and you forget about it, and somehow it's a month or two later and you can't even remember, did I give that talk or didn't I, or what was the title, I can't remember. Do it right away. I try to actually do it on the plane, if it's a plane trip, on the plane home. So it's my first document that I complete. So remember to do it as you go. And there are a lot of things you want to have: an honors section, an award section. If you do patents, you might want to include that information as well. Professional roles. Now we have a research profile, a clinical profile, and an impact of work, which means that there's an opportunity to write a little bit about what you do. Not just say, these are my publications, but what kind of subject matter have I grown in my publications? What area am I interested in? How my clinical work is, affecting my patient population and the impact. So they're a little wordy, but they're a chance for you to describe in a more personal way what you're all about and what your contribution has been. Because it's hard to read this stuff. Remember, a lot of the people on the AA committee are not in your field. So they don't know that your paper is the seminal paper on that topic, because they don't do that topic. You may not even know what that topic means, much less what you did for it, okay? So here's your chance to boast about yourself, okay? And you have to boast about yourself, okay? You do. I use the example, maybe not a great one, of Coca-Cola. I don't think there's anybody in the entire world that has not heard Coca-Cola, okay? I don't care where they live, in Africa, I don't think, God help us, in Aleppo, there's still Coca-Cola bottles there, and they still know what Coca-Cola is. But Coca-Cola is still advertising. God knows what their budget is. It's probably billions of dollars, right? They're still doing it every day. It's there all over the place. It's on the bus, it's on the train, it's on the TV, it's wherever you go, okay? You need to advertise yourself. Don't think of it as a negative thing to do. Don't expect your chairman knows what you did. You think like, he's got to know how hard I worked. It was so hard to get that going at Elmhurst, and I'm the only one who managed to get the ER to really work and see patients sort of on time and get it going. He has a lot of things to do. He may not have noticed that you were the key organizer for that event, or that you reorganized that event. You have got to let people know. It's not obvious, because they have their own set of worries and things to do, They have a dean, and they have to worry about informing him and keeping him up to date and all those sort of things. You need to let your leadership, whatever that's your division head, your chair, whoever it is that you're working with, what your activities are. And that can be in a friendly way, by the way. You don't have to it's not one-upmanship. It's just letting people know what you did. It can be a simple email. I'd just like to know, I organized that medical student event for teaching. We really, we did it last Saturday. We had a great turnout. We had 20 residents who said, devoted to surgery, and they're now real interested in our department, and I was just really pleased with the turnout, and we ended up with, in the morning we did lectures, in the afternoon I showed them how to do, abdominal exam for an acute abdomen, and they were really excited about what they learned and what they could see. So, if you don't tell somebody, don't assume they know. You got to let them know. Impact trainees mentorship is good. Everybody wants to mentor people. Everybody thinks we should be mentoring people. Not everybody does, okay? One of the chairs that I work with here, not here now, but anyway, did not believe in mentoring. Thought everybody should be able to mentor him or herself, and it was not their role as chair to mentor anybody. And you may have one of those in your department, quite honestly. Somebody who feels, I kind of did it myself, I figured out what I wanted to do, I figured out how to get here, and nobody told me, so I'm not bothering telling you either, okay? Because if I could do it myself, why should I bother telling you? You can do it yourself too. And either you figure it out, it's your problem, don't bother me. So even though I know the dean has made him put on the line in writing and other ways that he is committed to department chairs and departments in general mentoring their faculty, that they can't just take it for granted, that they have to be mentoring them, that may or may not translate in your department. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, and departments are different, subject matters are different, styles are different. You got neurosurgery, which is a small department, it's kind of a different kind of thing. They probably all know each other, it's not huge, and you got internal medicine that has a huge department, and it's not easy for people to know each other, even within the same department, right? It's huge. So, you have to kind of understand the dynamics of your department. And then a good way to find out about an institution is volunteer for a couple of committees. We have really, really good individuals at Mount Sinai. Some of them are in the room, my colleagues here. They'll take a phone call, right, if we have a tough patient and need help, which maybe, knock on wood, occasionally, not too long ago was my husband in the emergency room. They'll, help out and figure out and, help you out. And you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn how they do their process, and you say, that's interesting, maybe we should try it in our department. You learn a lot from the committees, much more than the subject matter of the committee. So it's a good opportunity to network and find out about the institution. Publications, of course, invited lectures, presentations. I don't know what a voluntary presentation is. What's a voluntary versus involuntary presentation?
Nobody asks you, you just come in and talk.
Oh, okay, you may, I thought that's what happens on the subway. That guy's talking to himself. I guess that's a voluntary presentation. Anyway, media resource, that's big now. I went to a meeting here at Sinai, was it last weekend or the weekend before, where we talked about making special apps for stuff. And it's amazing, these people can do an app, you tell them you have a problem, and they come up with an app where your patients can walk around and fill it out all day. So a lot of people do things. The format I mentioned, the research profile, the clinical profile, and the impact. Short paragraphs that tell a little bit more about you to make you come alive, be out of the written page. You should spend your time on this. I think it's a good way to let people know what you're like. Do you look at that when you look at the CVs?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we do. Because it's hard to read all this stuff. So this is kind of brings it together. So it's an important page. It's an important part of the CV. Grants is a way of listing grants, current, past, what your role is, how much money you acquire. Clinical trial participation, give your role and what part you were in, multi-center. You were asked to recruit 30 patients and recruited 30 patients. That's good, okay? You did a good job in that clinical trial. Trainees, we talked about mentoring. Teaching, there's a lot of ways of talking about teaching. Don't do one of these things where, you lecture to residents and there were 20 of them, and you talk to them for an hour, so you list in your CV all 20 of those people because you gave them a lecture for an hour, because it's going to look bad and nobody will believe you really did that. On the other hand, if one of those people you ended up mentoring because he or she really liked what you're doing, and they said, how did you get here? And you said, well, why don't you do a small project with me, and I'll see if you really like it. Then you write a letter of recommendation for them, and they get into the fellowship of their choice. Well, that's mentoring, okay? That took extra work and attention on your part, and you need that in your thing. But don't do those things where everybody, whether went through your program, you have 5 pages of mentoring, and, just anybody was in your program. It's not gonna look real, and it won't be all that appreciated. Administration is important. You need a lot of administration to keep things going, so you should include that. Publications, book chapters are fine, okay? And particularly on the clinical educator track, review articles, book chapters are contributions. If you see in the middle of this list is a little star asterisk, we'd like to know what you did since you last got promoted. One of the things A&P has a problem with occasionally is, why are you being promoted now? Okay? So you wrote, X number of papers, you did book chapters, and the last one was in 2004. Now, we're thinking like, why are they coming to me today? Looks like this person isn't doing any of that stuff anymore, okay? So another thing is, you don't want to go past your peak in terms of getting that promotion. And that happens too, because you get busy with other stuff. You want to do it when you're active, okay? And you can say, since I was last promoted, I published X number of papers, I did a book chapter, was I invited to speak at the national meeting, that you got some activity going on. And I'm just about done, so we can get to some other points of view. Invited lectures, voluntary stuff. Oh, last thing, chair statement, is that true? Is it still 2 pages? How long are they allowed?
Usually we recommend
2 pages.
full yeah.
And the person who writes that chair statement?
Supposedly the chair.
99% of them are written by you, because you know yourself better than anybody else. You probably give it to the chair, and if he's appropriate, he or she is going to read it, review it, modify it a little bit, but you're going to be writing it because you know yourself best. And the writing style in this is very different than creative writing. Think back to your first essay in your writing assignment in first grade, and it said, what did you do over your summer vacation? And your first line was, this summer I went to camp, right? Not real creative writing, right? The first sentence said it all. Went to camp and had a good time. Look at what the faculty handbook asks for and give it back to them, okay? Don't, be creative and say, I was driving down the street and blah, 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 and, forget it. That may get you in as an undergraduate into the University of Chicago, but for the A&P committee, just spit it back, They have a paragraph, information about regional and national reputation. Regional national reputation has been shown by this individual as the head of the committee for the annual, meeting of the National Society of blah, 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 and, spit it back. Whatever it is, give it back. Don't make them search for it. By the way, that's a good point for writing grants, too.
Quick question.
Sure.
Go back to the slide. There was a bullet about explaining team signs, explaining something if you're a middle author, explain your kind of.
Yeah, okay. So what field are you in?
Emergency medicine. I just wondering, are you counting second author as middle author?
You need to
Or-
explain it to somebody. So these days, particularly in some areas and some specialties, team publication is the way they go, and they don't feel that one of those individuals, like the first, is really the key author. And so somebody may have an asterisk, they may do 2 things. They may say, the first 2 people were co-authors. There wasn't one more than the other. On the other hand, you may want to say your role in that project. A lot of publications require that. You have to not only list the authors, but you have to list what role they had. Writing committee, critiquing, statistical input, you actually have to list it. I think JAMA requires it, a lot of journals do now. It's very common to have to say, what was your role in the paper? So I think especially when you have a long list of contributors and you're there in the middle, it used to be the first was sort of the lead author, the last was the person's lab or the senior person on it, and that still sort of holds. And you will hear at A&P and other places saying, oh, he was first author on a lot of those publications, or he was middle author on a lot. So if you're the middle person, you may have to explain what your role was, okay? Remember I mentioned on the research track that you may have a skill set that's crucial for getting all those papers published. And nobody will know unless you point that out, okay?
But I think for 2 authors, it's not the issue.
Oh, no,
If you're in a trial network,
yeah.
and you're listing 10 publications
Yeah.
because you were part of a trial network.
Right.
And all you did was feed some data,
It's
not-
annoying.
It's annoying.
Right, exactly. I think it's always better to be honest. Should we write that to Hillary or what? Okay, yes, yeah.
Don't
No
start.
politics, no politics. Oh, that's
So
nice.
I think that one of the challenges is particularly for clinician educators and practice track, is to try to understand this, and this is why we had this special session. And so we're very lucky to have a number of people on our panel this afternoon who are here to answer your questions. And thank you for generating some of them already, but I think there are others who may have additional ones. First of all, we have Dr. Lester Silver, who's professor of surgery, plastic surgery, and a professor of pediatrics. We have Dr. Andy Jagoda, who's professor and assistant chair, who will be soon stepping down from emergency medicine. He's been here for a number of years in that role. And I've already introduced Dr. Penny Asbell. We also have Kathy Perugine, who's the administrative director for the Appointments, Promotions, and Tenure Office. And just to remind you, I'm an OBGYN health services researcher. I'm a professor in the Department of OBGYN and Population Health Science and Policy, and I'm associate dean for this Office of Academic Development and Enrichment. So we are here to sort of sponsor these kinds of events to educate junior faculty on the ways in which they can promote their professional development. Okay, so why don't I go ahead and open it up to questions, and if you guys don't have some questions, I can generate some questions as well as our panelists.
Yes.
I'd just like to get back to the team science question because I'm actually in pediatric emergency medicine, and one of our problems is sample size. So we cannot get enough numbers of patients, pediatric patients with rare diseases, and so we've actually formed multi-center networks where everybody in my field is part of this network. And so one of the problems when it comes to getting letters is, since I'm collaborating with every professor in my field, I've had to gone to non-pediatric fields to solicit letters. So that's just kind of like one problem with getting the letters. The second thing is, in terms of listing the publications, because I am a co-investigator, so I'm not the PI or the senior author, I'm in the middle, and there's probably at least like 50 people that are involved because it's 25 to 50 investigators like all across the country. How do I, so I'll list my role as co-investigator in a multi-center trial. How do I specifically put that in the Mount Sinai?
I think they're both good questions. What's somebody who's very involved with Kathy with lots of different people, and you have to give, 10 or X number of names of people to suggest as reviewers for your application. But, he knows everybody in his field. But not, so you do pediatric ER. There might be, what do you think about that, Andy? Because there would be some, not everybody would be in that group.
Yeah, so no, not everyone would be in the group, number one. Number two, you might be in big work groups, but you're not necessarily intimately collaborating. So we would vet your list and we would decide from there. So I don't think that's an issue. And as far as being a team member, it's one thing to feed some data. It's another thing to be involved in independent analysis and creative interpretation. And so I think if a CV is made up only of team membership without any unique role, I don't think that carries a lot of weight. But if you really have taken the data set and made your own independent interpretation, sure, your first author or your last author, and that carries weight. I would say, though, if you as a team member document you were the #1 recruiter for the study, sure, that would be noteworthy.
So for a number of this study, I was the site principal investigator that was responsible for the conduct of this study at the site.
Yeah. Site investigator with one patient contribution, But we would look at that. That's where the meeting with the chair takes place.
And that's why in those big collaborative things, you might want to look to be on the writing team for the paper. At least often those big studies develop several papers, right? Not just one. So you might say, look, I'm really interested in the role of the family in this disease or whatever. you know, I want to work on that paper, you know, kind of thing. So I would try to take that effort the next step to identify your interests and your expertise and your contribution in that role, okay? So that's why we find in that voluntary track, you'll have somebody who's involved in clinical research, and what they did is feed a few patients to pulmonary or sleep disorders, which is great. We need those people. That's how we run clinical trials. But they're not going to be able to say they didn't start the trial, they didn't write the protocol, they didn't do any of those things. So again, in that paragraph, where you might identify some of your contributions, you know, specific contributions.
Great. Are there other questions? I have a question for you. I have seen I'm wondering what are the most sort of creative and sort of powerful way you've seen people take their impact in terms of social media for their CV, and how did the A&P process, you know, deal with that? And was that a positive thing? So I'm asking kind of two questions. Have you seen it done creatively, and how give recommendations about how people might be able to utilize that?
So to Sinai's credit, I think we've been fairly flexible and accepting of contribution. And I think when we redesigned the CV format and allowed the narrative on impact, that opened the door for people indeed to explain what they've done. I think the A&P committee pays attention to impact. And so, for example, there was one person who had a large podcast, established podcast. He gets 150,000 downloads a month, over 1 million a year. It's hard not to pay attention to the impact that this person's having. So I think social media at our institution and at others, we're paying attention to it. Our MedED, our Med portals are another social media tool, web-based tools that we're encouraging all our educators to use, and it's opened tremendous opportunities. And of course, we're all familiar with web-based publications, and our educators are using those, and our scientists are using those to disseminate knowledge. But the impact and the chair's letter have the opportunity to emphasize this contribution. I'll say just one other thing. Sinai, it has been very supportive of promotion overall. And the A&P committee really wants to promote people from assistant to associate professor. You almost have to try not to be promoted. With all the things that we've said in the meetings with the chair, promotion here to associate professor is not difficult. Promotion to chair to professor does become a bit more difficult. It's formulaic. I think most of the chairs are familiar with the formula. All you have to do is establish regional presence, regional impact to make associate professor here. So I think Sinai is to be credited. We want to keep our faculty, and we want our faculty to prosper. And so promotion is not difficult from assistant to associate professor.
Other questions?
For instance,
You mean before you came to Sinai, or while you're here?
Before coming to Sinai, you have some work done in other institution. Does that carry weight or has any impact on the application?
did you have an appointment at the other institution
Yes.
before you came to Sinai?
Mhm.
Because usually when people move over from one institution to another as a lateral move, they're rarely, if ever, or almost never downgraded. They come across at that same level. But that's another place where, you could describe your interest in what you've been doing, and you're likely to continue doing it here, et cetera, in an impact statement. Well, the chair could put that in. Usually, we suggest in the chairman's letter, you put down in a lot of bullet points to try to emphasize a number of things which normally wouldn't stand out in a line-by-line description in your CV. But you could put in all kinds of stuff in your impact statement. I mean, we have people who have God knows how many degrees and MBAs, and they spent 2 years in Somalia. They play 4 musical instruments. they're a black belt in karate, they run a computer company, you know, et cetera, et cetera. In that case, they usually just take my job, and that's it.
Well, one thing you want in that a chair's letter and/or in your part of your CV is what are you going to be, especially coming from another institution, what are you going to be doing here? You know, sort of, how did you get, you know, why are you here? You know, so you mean here, I came here to develop the pediatric ER where I, you know, work. We're going to be expanding it here, and I'm, you know, taking over the role as co-director here to expand it and meet the community needs, or, you know, who knows what. So we're looking to see what, especially for someone new entering Sinai, what are they going to be doing here? What is it, you know, what's their role here? And that should certainly be well defined in the chair's letter, maybe in your CV as well, because otherwise we're kind of confused, like, and so why is he here? Sounds like the same thing he did last time, or something like that. So you should kind of be thinking, frankly, if you take the job, you should be thinking also, what am I going to be doing new, different, or advancing, you know, whatever it is that interests me.
The other piece of that is if you come here, let's say as an assistant, and you're looking after a while to move up to associate, you would have shown some trajectory over those few years of having done something or done some progressive work or added on to what you came here with. If you were here a few years and you decided to try to move up, and here nothing much happened over those few years, you would still be a bit delayed in terms of moving up in rank.
Yeah, and that's where I mentioned the asterisk that you can put on new publications, or certainly describe in some form or another what's new since you were last promoted.
We have a lot of faculty who have joined us and are involved in heavy clinical activities. And what are the strategies that you recommend to them to kind of get their career started and, you know, enhance their reputation both inside and locally?
You're talking about full-time faculty.
These are full-time faculty, yeah.
Well, some full-time faculty, if indeed they come here with a huge practice and they continue it, might wind up being considered for the clinical practice track, regarding the fact that 90% of their work is clinical and not a lot of scholarly activity is expected on that track. But on the other hand, the majority probably of clinicians here are on this clinical educator track. The difference is besides practicing, here they will have opportunities to educate residents and fellows. They will, as a result, usually, if they're not doing basic science, as a result of their large practice, be able to put together presentations and papers that deal with a large group of patients that will lend themselves to some type of publication. And then if they're well-known or become well-known in some of their regional and, more important, national societies, they're on a committee or they give an instructor course or they do those type of things. Those are the things which would enhance, quote-unquote, their reputation and their CV when they're looking to move up a rank.
What about the more junior people?
I think one of the steps you want to think about with people who are mainly clinicians is, what do they want to do? Okay? If they want to, you know, expand their practice and become even a better known, better, you know, respected clinician, that's probably kind of the practice track trend, which is going to look at RVUs, revenue, referral sources, and things like that. And less on the publication end, the research or academic, you know, that kind of academic activity. On the other hand, if it's somebody you just hired, it's their first year or two out, and they're not so sure, this is an opportunity, if you know, you're interested, and it sounds like you are, in mentoring them, say, like, where do you want to go with this? Because if they're thinking they want to be more academic, you know, when they did their fellowship, they did a little research project, they'd like to try that again, you know, another topic, but, you know, that kind of activity again, well, they need to kind of figure out how they're going to get time and effort to do that. So, you know, I think a little bit is trying to figure out what they want. And you know, it's just, you know, here it is fall. I know we all think like it was just starting as summer and I was going to do all those things over the summer, and now it's fall and the leaves are gone, and you know, kind of thing. And pretty soon it's like it's January and then it's summer and then you know, it's all over again and it's another year. So I think I always tell people, I don't always do it myself, but take at least one day a year where you think about where you want to go with this. You know, just take some time for yourself to explore, what have I done, what do I like, what I don't like, where would I like to be? And that might be looking around and saying, you know, whatever that person's doing, that looks good, that's kind of what I want to do. And then question, how could I get there? You know, what do I need?
So my take on this is, number one, they need to be aware that they can get promoted, it's not a problem. So they need to understand that the key word in promotion is impact, so they have to demonstrate impact. The chairs or the division leader's role is to make sure that they're on a hospital committee. That's easy. They need to make sure that they get on a state society committee. It's easy. So if they're interested in quality, they join the state quality committee. They don't have to, it's not so difficult. Or the income or the revenue committee or whatever committee the society has, and they've got to start working toward being on an interest group or national committee. Almost every national group that I know is dying for people to take on membership roles. Promotion is a reflection of impact and leadership. And so people have to understand that they need to get on this pathway. If they're in operations, it makes sense they're on the quality committee. If they're on the quality committee, they need to be thinking, how are the quality improvement programs they're doing impacting the practice? And then even if it's just writing an article for the state newsletter, they need to disseminate the impact that they've had. It's really simple. And a lot of people are thinking about JAMA articles in New England Journal. It doesn't have to be that. And so 2 committees, 2 newsletter entries, some workshop, 2 invited grand rounds. If a chair can't get their faculty invited for 2 visiting grand rounds, they're not, because we are graduating hundreds of residents who are dying to invite Sinai faculty to give a grand round. 2 grand rounds, 2 committees, 2 newsletter entries, 5 years, you're ready for promotion. It's really that simple.
Kathy, I had a quick question for you. What's the number one, oh, I'm sorry, did you, just really quickly, what's the number one thing that you have to tell people who send in their paperwork to you? What's the one thing that always falls through the cracks or there's a problem with and you always have to bounce back? What's the biggest issue?
Well, the biggest would be the CV format.
Oh, sorry.
The biggest would be the CV format. We find that they come in, or sometimes they'll just insert the clinical or research profile and leave the rest of it the same. When there's, you know, if they took the time to go through the instructions, there's usually a little bit of talk under each category. You know, you'll see the importance of sticking to the format for senior promotions and appointments.
The other thing I think is a matter of getting recommendation letters, because you could send in 8, 10, 12, 15 names. Usually we recommend these should be people that you know or who know you, and you could send them an email and say, please be aware you're going to get a note from our dean to support my application for whatever. But a lot of people either write, don't write, drag their feet, you know, but until a reasonable number of letters are received, it's hard to proceed to review the application.
Well, we also added in the instructions not too long ago that the reviewer doesn't have to know the candidate, especially personally, as long as they're in the field and they can provide a peer analysis of your work, which some of them are actually willing to do. They'll start the letter by saying, I have no knowledge of this candidate, but I read your criteria and the journals that were submitted and the CV, and this is what I think.
And you can't use your mother. Father, maybe.
Back to the whole involvement and demonstration of leadership, though, that conversation early on in a career of how do I get involved so that people know me, it's kind of a sad state of affairs if 8 years into your career you don't know 10 people who could comment on your work. And that means you really haven't been invited for grand rounds, and it means you haven't been on any committees, and you haven't gone out. And if you haven't gone out, that means you don't have a regional presence, which means you're really not ready for promotion. If you don't know 10 people who can write for you, you're not ready for promotion. So your chair's job, or the division leader's job is to get you out there if you want to be out there.
Great. Did
I
you?
I have specific questions regarding scholarly activities. And you said be on the committee, check, be part of the regional or national organization, check. Basically being on the hospital side, doing administrative work that impact lives of many people, including patients and your peers. The question really comes down to scholarly activity. And I think things have changed significantly as far as just publishing into a peer-reviewed journal, writing a blog, or you mentioned newsletter. They don't carry that kind of impact that we have heard from the previous panel and the panel. You need to have publication in a peer-reviewed journal in a work that you are doing. Or is there a number of papers that you have to publish for clinical
The clinician educator could get promoted with 10 book chapters and not one peer-reviewed publication because they have disseminated knowledge. And I would also, if somebody's developed a syllabus that's even used internally, a teaching syllabus, that counts as a pseudo-publication. But the clinician educator, its dissemination, it doesn't specify it has to be peer-reviewed. It should be, some quality. But that's why I say the bar isn't that high at Sinai to go to associate professor. So
In addition, your packet application is looked at in total as a package. You may not have done too much what you're considering scholarly activity, but you do an immense amount of teaching. Or because you have a particular skill in a particular division or department, you may be of great value to your department and to the institution, and things of that sort. So you can't just say, well, I only have a few papers, this is never going to work. It's looked at in its entirety in terms of, things that you are doing.
And the second question part to it, chair has to recommend you. If chair has the different mindset of looking at, you haven't published enough, how can you be even considered to be submitted for the committee? How do you get around that issue?
Now, that's a tough one. Here's how you get around it. You see if you can submit your CV for a review by the AMP committee to see, can someone do that, send you their CV to ask for? No, they can't do that.
This is a feudal society.
Yeah.
Well,
The head of the feudal system.
a
is the
chairman
chair.
can, a chairman
chairman
can
can.
submit
Chairman
it.
can, but if he or she thinks you're not ready, they're not doing it.
Yeah.
So you need to convince them that you want to be promoted and that this is important to you and you have this, you went through I would remember how you're writing that letter. They said, regional reputation, I have a regional reputation. Publish, I have published. You go through each one of those things. I've done all those things. Okay, so why shouldn't I be promoted? It sounds like I hit every, or most of the key points in the description in the handbook. And then if he or she doesn't want to promote you, you got to say, why not? What is it that you think I'm lacking? Explain it to me.
But in a large department where there are
Yeah.
a few people who deal with appointments and promotions, very often in surgery, we will speak to the chairman and point out why person A, B, or C deserves to be or has a good shot at it, or we think he's almost there but needs. So you might have somebody in your division or department who you could sit down with, who then could interface with you in the chair in terms of pointing out what you do have and the necessity for certain things in order to get promoted.
Elizabeth?
And if that doesn't work, I believe in physical violence.
Don't most of the departments have a mentor?
Yeah, so-
Director?
Well, they're supposed to. Yeah.
So, as many of you probably heard if you were here for the earlier session, there is supposed to be a mentoring champion, and some departments have a mentoring vice chair in every department, not only at Mount Sinai, but throughout our system. That's what we're working towards to make sure that different divisions and different departments have different setups. So for example, medicine has such a large group of physicians. They have a number of mentoring champions. Many of them are division directors, some are not. And so the idea is that every junior faculty person within Sinai should have somebody who they can identify as their mentor, who can help to serve all these things. But the other thing about mentorship to remember is, and I'm a strong believer in this, you never have just one mentor, right? You get mentorship from different people in different ways. And so I think that's another key and important message. And even for this process, not just your chair, but somebody else from your department to review your CV and those kinds of things. And then the one last thing I was just going to add is I think this impact statement is so important because it's your chance to, even self-reflection, you get to have a chance to say, well, how have I really moved my field? What's my impact? Crafting that and really thinking that through will also help you better sell to your chair or to whoever else. So I think that's also one thing I just wanted to add. So I realize, and I want to say thank you so much to our panel. I know it's after 5, way after, and we really appreciate it. And I think this was a very interesting session. And again, feel free to look on the website for OADE and send us questions if you do. And I'd also like to end by thanking Elizabeth Urbanski and Ramesh Shatali for all of their great setup and work to make this event happen.